Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So of course we had the pretty small ban list just drop, and there were like a total of 5 changes, mostly changes that I think we were expecting though. In all honesty, really small, pretty forgettable. Now on one hand, yes, I would have liked to see some more changes, but at the same time, I do feel like the game is in a pretty reasonably good place right now, so this list could just be Konami saying that they don't want to make too many significant changes right this second. Anyways, of course, today we are going to go over a few things that we saw happen in light of the ban list, and then a few other cards that have been trending on the market over the past few days. Let's get started. So first up, it's Kashtira Fenrir, and this card's price has just been all over the place ever since its release. Over the last 2 ban lists, we've seen this card get dirt cheap right before the list, and then as soon as that list drops and it reveals that it's not limited or banned, the card has spiked both times. So it shouldn't be a surprise. Fenrir was limited and then banned over in the OCG, so I think it was pretty natural that players were speculating it'll get hit here eventually. It remains one of the strongest standalone monsters in the entire game, putting a lot of pressure on your opponent by threatening to banish one of their cards and searching for a copy of itself as follow-up for the following turn. Now, even if they limited the card, it would be pretty much dead, since Kashtira doesn't really look very threatening with a Rise Heart now banned. Anyways, we thankfully have the Megaton Secret Rare printing that has brought down the price of the Ultra quite a bit. With the Ultis, those were down to like $25 before the list. At the list, they shot right up to $70, and since then they've cooled down a little bit. They're sitting between $50 and $60 right now. For the Ultras and Secret Rares, those were pretty cheap, with people not wanting to sink money into the lower rarity printings. I believe they were around like $10 for the Ultra and then $8 for the Secret. But now we have the original Darkwing Blast Ultras up at $20 and the Megaton Secret Rares up at $15. This does help the value of the tins a little bit if you went in on those, since that's a bit more value that people had originally written off. I'd definitely make sure that you guys own at least a set of this card if you don't already, since it's most likely going to continue to be splashed into a ton of different strategies as long as it remains at 3. Alright, another card here. I didn't really think I'd be talking about this one though. It's Salamandra of Fire. So in Soul Burning Volcano, we got a bit of Salamandra support. Kinda weird, it gave the deck like a tuner and a synchro monster, but some of the support did look pretty interesting. I think the best piece out of that set was Salamandra of Fire, which on summon searches for a level 4 or lower Salamandra monster from your deck, but then locks you into fire monsters for the turn. Salamandrates are a pretty old strategy, but they're pretty strong in the current format, able to run a bunch of impactful hand traps and generic disruptions in the main board, in addition to a relatively compact yet explosive engine. The big thing about this list is that Salamandra Gazelle was pulled off the list back to 3, which is definitely a huge boost to the deck. It allows the deck to get a key card like Spinny into the graveyard, as well as put an extra body onto the field much more easily. With the deck already seeing a small amount of success prior to the list, I think it'll be somewhat decent going into the upcoming format and should see fairly consistent regional tops. The problem is that no one really opens Soul Burning Volcano, right? So there's actually relatively few quantities of this card on the market. I think if you go to your locals, it's pretty rare that you're going to find someone that actually has Salamandra of Fire in their trade binder. This card started off cheap at around $10. Once Salamandra started to do okay, it went up to like 15 to 20, but now that Gazelle is back to 3, this card is actually up to $25 to $30. Not too bad, but this is really the only really worthwhile card out of Soul Burning Volcano, so if you guys want to play Salamandra, good luck finding your copies of this. Expect this card to actually retain a decent chunk of its value, as long as the card remains difficult to find. Brief note about this one here, but the Unchained Soul Lord of Yama is up yet again. We talked about this card a couple of times. I think there were some players that considered the possibility of Konami hitting Unchained on the ban list. It's done really well at the last couple of YCS events, taking up a huge percentage of each top cut, so it was certainly possible that Konami could just choose to hit the deck. However, it seems that that is not the case, and actually the deck gets a little bit stronger with the banning of a Rise Heart, though to be fair, Unchained already had a pretty decent Kashtira matchup. Anyways, with Unchained now definitely looking like the best deck in the game, we've seen Yama go up yet again in price. Yama is an absolutely amazing Link 2, probably one of the strongest like Link 2 support cards for an archetype I think Konami has ever printed. It searches for an Unchained monster, revives any fiend from your graveyard, and potentially pops one of your own cards as well. Yama was at around $12 to $15 leading up to the list, but now Yama is up yet again to $20, since it is something that you're going to run at 2 or 3 in the Unchained extra deck, and the deck is looking really strong going into next format. I could see them hitting the deck somehow on the December ban list, or whenever we get the next one, but obviously it will depend on how the format plays out. Unchained is a deck with a really high skill ceiling. It's not like everyone can just jump on it and start playing it and do well with it. If you do want to give the deck a shot though, you will have to grab Yamas fairly soon. I could see it continuing to go up slowly over time if the deck does continue to do well, up to like $25 or maybe even $30, and this card shouldn't be reprinted until late into 2024. While we're talking about Unchained, I want to make a brief note here about Abyss Dweller. I think we all know by now, but Dweller is this generic rank 4 Xyz monster that stops your opponent from activating graveyard effects for the turn. Really simple, yet it's a very strong rank 4 monster, as was clearly demonstrated when the card was an extra deck staple back in tier limit format. After we saw the wave of tier limit hits with the limits to the tier limit and Ishizu cards, Dweller kind of fell out of the format and no one was using it, and that led to this card's price tanking. It was $70 during the format for the Ultimate Rare printing back then, but it had fallen to between $30 and $35. Now, however, players are talking about needing to run Dweller in their extra decks once again as a way to deal with the Unchained strategy. It's kind of all over the place. I remember someone saying that Kashtira could make this card with 2 Rise Hearts. I don't know how realistic or probable that is now that a Rise Heart is banned, but rank 4s are pretty easily accessible in general for a lot of different strategies, so this may be something to watch out for. For now, the Ultimate Rare printing is up just a tiny bit, sitting at $40 on TCG Player. The card does have a bunch of other printings though. It has like Common, Super, Ultra Rare. I think you should be able to grab just a copy of the card for $1 or so to make sure that you have access to it. But yeah, if you do like the high rarity stuff, keep an eye on the price of Ulti Dwellers. They're generic enough that if the card does see play again this format in some sort of meta strategy, I could see them easily hitting the $50 to $60 mark. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about Ultimate Slayer. Now, this is a side deck card that was released in Power of the Elements. It saw a decent amount of play over in the OCG, but that never actually materialized here in the TCG. It's basically targeted elimination of an opponent's extra deck monster, where you send an extra deck monster of yours to the graveyard to bounce an opponent's monster with the same extra deck type, but your opponent can't respond to this card's activation. So essentially, right, you could proc a Garura, bounce an opponent's fusion, you could dump Trouble Sunny to bounce a Link monster, Herald of the Arclight to bounce a Synchro, and so on. Honestly, I'm not too sure why the card never really did anything here. I think it's 2 things, right? So I think the existence of a Rise Heart is a thing, since you can't use Ultimate Slayer to bounce a Rise Heart since it has to send to the graveyard as cost. The other thing is that it deals with just one problem and not an entire established board, so maybe it was just too limited in terms of its application or use. Now, however, players are thinking that maybe with the banning of a Rise Heart and the way that the format is shaping up, Ultimate Slayer might actually end up being a decent side deck tech. The card has always had a ton of potential, right? And with it not getting a reprint in this year's Megatins, a lot of players probably thought that they're just better safe than sorry, and picked up a set of the card. Ultimate Slayer was down at like $12 to $13. Over the last week or so, we've seen the card go up to now being a $20 card. I'm still not convinced by this one quite yet. I personally, right now, wouldn't be spending more than like $15 on it. Maybe you guys know more about the card and its applications than I do. Either way though, I do think you guys should be a bit cautious about picking this card up, because it's also possible that the card will get reprinted by the end of the year. Alright, there's 2 other cards I want to talk about here that I didn't get to earlier in the week, so these aren't banlist related, but are rather related to cards that will be coming out. The first one here is Coach King Giant Trainer, a rank 8 monster that requires 3 level 8 monsters as materials. It lets you detach a material from it, draw a card, and then if that card is a monster, you get to burn your opponent for 800 damage. The crazy thing is you can use this card 3 times per turn, so theoretically you could draw 3 and burn your opponent for 2400 damage. Really cool card. This card I think was mostly used by Danger Dark World to draw into a bunch of additional resources. Now Dark World hasn't done too much recently, but Giant Trainer is trending once again because of the Horus archetype, which is going to be coming out in Age of Overlord here in the TCG next month. That deck allows you to spam level 8 monsters onto the field, and you are able to splash a Horus engine into various things, so it could possibly be used as a generic engine that provides big bodies as material, as well as draw power. I think the card is really cool, though of course it could be vulnerable to effect negation, and that's 3 bodies that you've invested into making this card. Anyways, it seems like it's something that is on the minds of a lot of players right now, as all of the card's printings have already gone up in price. The original Secret Rare from Number Hunters is really expensive, though it is the nicest printing. They're like $30 to $35 right now. And for the cheaper alternatives, there is the common from OTS pack, and then there's also the super rare printing from an old German advent calendar. I'm really glad that TCG Player finally has its own listing for that printing. Those are each around $10 right now. I think that if you guys own one copy of this card for your own usage, that's not a bad call, right? But you may want to consider dumping your other copies. I could see Konami reprinting this card yet again in order to encourage people to pick up the cards from Age of Overlord, and it would probably be best to offload this card while it's so hyped up right now. And finally, the last card I want to talk about is Void Imagination. So I think we did talk about this card before, I might be mixing it up with something. Void Imagination is the Infernoid support card responsible for allowing you to fusion summon. And Infernoids are getting new support in a set in the OCG called Terminal World, providing support for several older archetypes. And the cards were just reviewed, I think a couple days ago. They got a new fusion monster and some spells that seemed really broken. I think one of the spells is like a card destruction. Anyways, their new fusion monster does seem really good, so they'll actually need to use Void Imagination in order to make it. I think the deck won't be as strong here in the TCG as it is in the OCG. The OCG still has that Grasslook Screener at 2, which will help the deck out a lot, but Infernoids are a deck that a lot of players look back at really fondly because a lot of people did use it during Zodiac format. This card has only one printing, since it wasn't reprinted in the Megatins from its year at all, and as of the time I'm filming this, there are only 4 copies available on TCG Player, with the cheapest one literally being like $20. I would assume that when we get Terminal World here in the TCG, they should be giving us reprints of a bunch of cards from the archetype, and that should include Void Imagination, but of course nothing is a guarantee, so I can't say that for sure. I personally don't own any copies of this card, but if you guys do, I definitely think you should look to dump them while there is all of this really early hype for the Infernoid archetype, since the support was literally just revealed. Alright guys, that is all I have for today's episode. I know, sort of an underwhelming ban list, right? I really thought we were going to see some cool changes, but I guess not. Maybe it should tell us though that the December ban list is going to be insane, who knows. For now, we are playing in mostly the same format. No Kashtira, a little bit less Dragon Link, but we'll still see decks like Unchained and Pearly running around. And of course we do have Age of Overlord coming out with some new support next month, so that's definitely going to shake things up and add a lot of different cards and text to the format. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch, please make sure that you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Also make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below and hit subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.